Good morning and welcome back to my channel, Courageous Communication, where we dive into topics that most people try to avoid. Today, I'm excited to welcome my friend, Higinia, and fellow small business owner. Higinia has her own business, Out Integrative Health, which focuses on moving from grief to health through true healing. She believes that rising above grief can lead to unexpected change. Today, we will discuss grief in the wake of COVID-19, and I say wake loosely because we know it's still here. So what I want to do is just take this time to welcome Higinia to the channel.
Hi.
Welcome. Yay. How are you?
Great. Thank you,
Good.
Jessica. It's so good to be here. And I really appreciate your efforts in really bringing topics to your audience that really will improve their well-being. So thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. And we just have to remember that not everyone has access. And that's an unfortunate situation to go to a therapist or seek out any type of grief healing place. That can be due to location. It can be due to economic situations. And so this is kind of an easy and quick way to get some resources out to the public, but also, enjoy some conversation with each other and be able to mix and mingle as well.
It's just terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we came on, I was talking to Higinia and letting her know that, much of my early background when I was working as an associate, or I think back then it was called an intern, LPC intern, not associate anymore. I think they're associates now. But I was being supervised by a grief counselor. He worked specifically with grief and worked with Hospice of Midland. And this was when I was in West Texas. And I was able to complete a ton of hours for internship. Thank you, Rays of Hope, which is a children's grief center in Midland. And what I learned was so much about loss and grief and how expression of that is so important, but that it is so stunted at the same time. Like the need and what you need to do and what you're capable of doing sometimes are in direct conflict with each other, and how there's kind of the connection between loss and grief. And sometimes we take that for granted and we look at that as two different things instead of something that can be interdependent. So whenever I met Higinia, I started to pick her brain immediately whenever I found out that she was skilled in grief. I don't know if you call it counseling. What do we call this? Help me to understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. She's a
Specialist.
specialist in grief. And so, anytime you can find someone who specializes or is, the subject matter expert on something, I want to dive in. I want to hear it. I want to try to understand it. I may not always agree 100% with it, but I can accept it and I can think on it and chew on it for a little bit and then start to understand it more, because sometimes we're a little resistant to the fact that maybe we've all experienced a whole lot of different types of grief. And what we talked about earlier was that we tend to minimize it. So I'm going to pass this over to Higinia now, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about that COVID-19 grief, but all the things that came with that, because there was a total loss of norms. So Higinia, you just take it away and teach us all you have.
Thank you, Jess, again. So I appreciate what you said about the resistance that we find sometimes. And one thing I always ask my clients is just to be open-minded. Right? We can always, my husband always tells me, because there's a little truth to everything, right? And so just if you can be open to just a little truth, and if that little truth helps you, that's awesome. But open-mindedness is always important in learning something new. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because that will be really helpful. So my experience actually kind of like you, Jessica, was unfortunately for my business, a lot of my expertise comes from experience. I've experienced a lot of loss in my life. especially a lot of deaths of relatives and loved ones, friends, coworkers, different people, but also a lot of losses that I never really identified as losses, like, loss of a job, loss of health. And in fact, on New Year's Eve, I got COVID pneumonia, and I was in the hospital for 14 days. And that was just, oh my gosh, I can't imagine the people that end up in the hospital, how terrifying it is. And not only, right, you're fighting for your life physically, but mentally, and emotionally, you're alone, right? You're alone. I mean, even the medical staff, they were wonderful with me at Methodist, but they just come, do their thing, and then get out, right? Because it's
Yeah.
COVID, right? And so you're alone a lot, and so it's just really, really, really scary. And so, I mean, mentally, you really have to fight through a lot of fear and thought. So that was at the hospital, but then I leave the hospital, and now I have to relearn how to walk. I have to relearn. I have no strength in my legs. I'm still learning how to breathe, correctly. And of course, I have 3 children and my husband. And so I'm not able to be there with them, much, because I don't have the strength. And so again, loss of health impacts so many areas, right? I'm a mom, and I'm always used to, like, yeah, let's do this. And I mean, I multitask, and now I'm barely trying to learn how to get up, and
Yeah.
so it really affected, right, just my quality time with my children. And so I really appreciate that they actually, like, hey mom, can we come and eat with you, so that we would have meals in bed. But we take that for granted. If you lose your health, it's not just your physical, but what other activities will it stop, or
Yes.
what else will you have to relearn to try to adjust, right?
Yeah.
And so loss of health, and right now, probably that's one of the biggest thing with COVID. A lot of people, even if you haven't had COVID where it debilitates you, I'm almost certain that you have somebody in your life that has been,
Yeah.
that, an aunt, a brother, a sister, a cousin, a friend, a coworker. One of the things I've loved about COVID is I've seen a lot of people just step up, even get out of their comfort zones, even reaching out to people they typically wouldn't even do that. But now people are reaching out. But that means, right, you're running an errand for a friend, right? And now with gas, and so it just affects so many things. And so even if you don't experience it personally, grief is there. You've in one of the main definitions of grief that I hope that just stays with you is that grief is normal and natural, because we are human beings. It is normal to grieve, and grief simply means that you have an emotional response to something that has just happened. And it could be something happy, but it's an emotional response. But typically, it is an emotional response of something that has changed.
Yeah.
And so you're reacting to that unexpected change.
Mhm.
And so but it's important to understand that grief is normal and natural response to loss.
I love that. I love to normalize things because I think so many things we just act as if that it's even when we normalize things, it's normal for other people, but it's not okay for us. How often do you see that? Like, oh, I give this person space to grieve, but for me, I need to get it back together. Like,
Oh gosh, Jessica, you just hit it right on. I mean, we don't think it's normal, but we're not the only ones that think that. That's how, unfortunately, our society has. That's what we've heard, even from us young children, right? Like kind of suck it up, buttercup, and just
yeah,
move on, or like, don't cry,
yeah,
and if you're gonna cry, go to your room, right? Like
yeah,
we're trained that that emotional pain is not normal, that we
Mhm.
shouldn't feel it, and if we do, then, you got to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
So yes, you hit it right on.
Yeah.
But it is normal. It is normal and natural. Like we're going to feel something like, we're not robots, right? We're something we see or hear or it happens to us, we're going to feel something. And so it's normal.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, so with COVID, we've had just that overall loss of norms in lots of different areas. And one of the things that I heard you say, and I think it's super important to address, is the loss of careers and jobs. And sometimes when we take on our careers as adults, it becomes our identifier. And so with COVID and the situation where there was so many people who were displaced from their job for nothing that they did, it was just a product of the situation that we were in. But so many people lost their identities, were out of work for long periods of time, longer than maybe they've ever been out of work before. It led to lots of different feelings. But one thing that a lot of people did not identify was the grief aspect of it. And so I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about how loss equals grief as well, especially in these types of situations.
Yes, yes. So so grief, right? The other part of that grief is normal and natural response to loss is to a familiar pattern, to the end or change of a familiar pattern of behavior. So that's the
Yes.
second of it, right? So if something that you're familiar with ends or changes, it produces grief, right? So you described it perfectly. Here comes COVID. We can't leave our homes. We most jobs did not have work at home. In fact, a lot of them, right, have resisted that concept, and now because they don't have that, then you can't work, period. And so then where is money going to come from, right? And I know we got help from the unemployment and things like that, but right, that is gone now. And so then you're used to, right, that's almost an honorable, right, part of humanity, is that we can work and we can
Yeah.
contribute and we can provide. And now that is gone, that is taken away from us. And so it starts affecting us, right, mentally. It's like, oh, who am I, and like you said, it's an identity issue. And then along with that, right, comes with loss of safety and trust, right? Because now, all these, higher uppers, right, are making choices, and there's so much political in it, involved in it. And then it just starts dividing us even more. And
Yeah.
so we just don't recognize, like, why am I feeling this? Well, we're grieving that change, the end of, or change in pattern of behavior. I'm used to going out of my house and working. And even if you work now from home, right, now you can't even separate, right, where you're working or not working, because you're
Yeah.
at home, right?
Yes.
And so then even that is a loss, because even though it could be a benefit, and somebody might feel that it's a great benefit to work from home,
Yeah.
but at the same time, where is the boundary, right? Where do I stop working? Because then I'm
Yes.
you know
I love that you brought that up. I actually am working as a workplace consultant for an oil and gas company right now, and most of their workforce is still working from home. I think they have the option of going into the office like one day a week. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on, is making sure that you um, are able to end your work day, give yourself a little bit of time before you switch your role, because we all, have a lot of different roles that we um, play into, and our work role and our home life role, since the work from home can really get confusing and meshed and intermeshed together. And it feels like we leave the office, but then we go back to the office and we leave it again and we come back because we just continue to get drawn back in, or we leave our workplace and the next thing we do is we pick up our work at home, and we don't know have that healthy separation. And so we've been talking a lot about that healthy separation. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. But one thing that I heard a lot, because there were a lot of people who came in that were directly affected by the job loss, was betrayal. It was this huge betrayal that in everyone's kind of like greatest time of need, like most vulnerable moments, that there was like handing out of pink slips essentially, right? And so that was another aspect of the grief, because we grieve that we trusted someone and then they personally did this to us, because we personalize that. A lot of people say, well, we don't personalize our work, but anything, like you said, that you're passionate about and that you're pursuing and is giving your life purpose as well, it gets personal.
Absolutely. Yes. Jessica, and the thing about grief that people, that as human beings, again, and I still don't know where it came from, but we tend to do a lot is minimize the impact it has on us. And for example, when whoever says, don't take it personally, it's like, why wouldn't we? We're the one that's experiencing it. We experience grief at 100%, and that's everybody. If you're a human being, you will experience grief. It's not whether you can muster all the the strength and you're not going to feel it. It's like you're going to feel it. Whether you deny it is a different thing, but you will feel that grief, that loss, that impact. And it is personal because, you're feeling it personal. And so this is, something you've given your whole life to, right? You've given your best, skills, your talents, and then all of a sudden, right, you're out of there. And so, yeah, that loss of trust, that loss of hope, right? Like, wow, I really thought they had my back, and they don't. And so yes, there's an array of emotions that happen with something like that. And it's real, like it. And so for us just to being careful and giving ourselves permission to feel that, and not just immediately like, well, this, or well, that, and minimize it and try to, make it. I know one of the things that I've learned, even as a Christian, is that sometimes we can spiritualize things. Oh, God has better plans for you, or everything happens for a reason. And the thing about grief is that it's because it's emotional, it's not intellectual. So even that intellectual statement that something better will come up. Let's say that is true. Okay. Let's give that heat it and say, okay, that's true. That intellectual statement will not heal my broken heart, because it's my heart that's broken, not what I think about things. Okay. Yeah. And so the thing about grief is it's emotional. It's about the heart. It's not about the mind. And so when we make intellectual statements when somebody's hurting, it's just not beneficial, And so we tend to stay away from the uncomfortable. So we always try to make it positive, and that's just not, it's just not the whole truth. Yeah, there might be something positive in it, but there's also something negative, and we have permission to feel the negative. And so many times we try not to feel or acknowledge or recognize the negative, and that's just stuck.
Yes. It's so one of the things that I wrote down while you were talking was that so many times we see that if it's not the emotion of sadness, then it's not grief. But that's not true. And so I think that that's like one of those myths that goes along with grief, and that we can actively debunk right here, that that's not true, that there can be an array of emotions and it still be grief.
And still be grieved. In fact, the other definition that I get my my certification from the Grief Recovery Institute, based in California, and one of the second definitions we use for grief is that grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end or change to familiar pattern of behavior, right? Conflicting feelings, mixed feelings. And so let's say again, a graduation, right? Right now we're in the midst of graduations and weddings, right? So graduation, you're proud of a graduate because it is such a great accomplishment,
Right.
especially as you get into higher education, right?
Yeah.
But that typically means that if it's a you know, a family member, a youth, you know, it typically means that they're moving on from home, you know, or from your city, you know, and they're moving to a different city, right? And so that means that you're what you're familiar with, having that individual, seeing them in and out every morning, having breakfast, having lunch, talking at night, da, 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 is no longer going to be there. It has ended. What you're familiar with has ended. So even though you're so incredibly proud of this accomplishment, the happy feelings, so exciting pride and excitement, you're also just really sad. I've had a lot of friends that have been in that situation, and their response, like, I don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about the sadness, because, you know, they only want to focus on the positive, which is again, which is great, but the sadness is also part of the package, you know, and it's okay, you know, that both of it are okay. And if you accept the whole thing, and I love, can you share the example you shared with me about the ice cream?
Oh, yes. So I work with a lot of kids that come in with grief situations. And so we talk about kind of course, going to ice cream shop, because I don't know any kid that doesn't love to go to the ice cream store. I love it. I still love it. I'm not
Oh
a kid.
gosh, yeah.
But getting an ice cream cone and then being able to get like a few different types of scoops, because we all want to imagine that 2 or 3 scoop ice cream, and, you know, having vanilla and chocolate and mint chocolate chip or cherry or whatever your choice is, and seeing it as individual flavors. You see each of those. But then what happens is you start licking that ice cream and they all kind of mix together, and it's hard to identify them independently anymore. They all start to taste like one flavor. And that's kind of what happens when we have grief and different feelings, even if they're conflicting feelings, they kind of all mix together, and they all start, it's hard to separate it anymore. We do our best to try to at times, right? Because avoidance is a coping mechanism, especially with grief. Just,
Yeah,
oh, let's just act as if it didn't happen,
absolutely.
act as if it's not there.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, what happens whenever we continue to avoid and act as if some of those difficult things aren't there?
Well, the first couple of things that happens is that you stay stuck. You know, grief is cumulative and cumulative negative. In other words, it piles up. Something positive will not, you know, cover up a negative experience. You know, it just keeps piling up. So the more you avoid, the more you deny, the more you minimize, the more you just ignore or dismiss, you know, it's not doing anything to it being piled up. So that's for sure that, you know, the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is that it starts manifesting in your life. You know, grief will, you know, one of my favorite books is The Body Keeps Score.
Yes,
And so
yes.
grief will manifest itself. That energy has to come out somehow. So it will start manifesting itself in illnesses, right? Your headaches, your stomach problems, your heart issues, even your respiratory issues. You know, asthma is actually connected a lot to just grief and loss that hasn't been, you know, dealt with. In fact, there was I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with technology here, but there was a study that was done back in the 80s that on people that were diagnosed as having depression, and they were prescribed antidepressants,
Okay.
To help them. But it
Mhm.
turns out that they weren't depressed. They had just been experiencing grief and trying to process that grief,
Yeah.
and so many times, Jessica, we're kind of like a fast food kind of society, that we want things fixed right away. And so
Instant gratification,
right.
baby.
So what we do is, right, again, medicine has its place, but immediately we go there and like, okay, then you're depressed, so let's do antidepressants, or we do this. And medicine is always the first, tends to be the first go to.
Yeah.
And many times we're just grieving, we're just trying to process what just changed or what just ended, and that now it is true that if you don't take the steps to process and deal with your grief, it can end up it can turn into a mental illness, inside depression and things like that.
For
But
sure.
grief initially is not that. It's
Yeah.
not, grief is not a mental illness.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that also has to be explained. But as far as your question, it starts manifesting itself in our bodies, and then it starts, unfortunately, also manifesting in our behaviors. Right? We get into addictions. Right? Want to numb things. Right?
Yeah.
And then we get into just, we have hard times with relationships. Right? Because again, these emotions get stuck, and we just can't hold on to relationships, whether it be a personal relationship or even a professional relationship. Right?
Mhm.
At work,
Mhm.
you have conflicts. And so unattended grief becomes, unattended grief, which is, grief is healthy, but
Mhm.
unattended grief becomes toxic, and that
Yeah.
becomes the unresolved grief. That unresolved grief is what we don't want. And that's unresolved grief is what leads to all these adverse consequences.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree with you more about the fact that there's no pill that anyone will give you that will help your grief.
Mm,
That is just the reality of the situation.
mhm.
And it's unfortunate. It stinks sometimes. We do want it to just go away. We want it to be fixed. I say that all the time. We are a instant gratification kind of society. I'd say, we're go to the Big Mac. We want it our way, the way we want it. No mustard, no pickles, and we want it in 2 minutes. And so, but what happens is we tend to lean into negative or harmful coping skills much easier as a society than we do to healthy and self-promoting coping skills. It's just something within us, because the harmful ones are typically easier to access. They don't require a whole lot of us, and they kind of feel good
Yeah.
sometimes. And so and they kind of serve as instant gratification. Unfortunately, they're temporary. It's a temporary fix to a problem that is still persistent in your life. And so, and all of those harmful coping skills are the things that help us to, unfortunately, develop what we call those lifestyle diseases, those things that really start to manifest on us, and our body starts to keep the score.
Absolutely. Well, and we call them STERBs,
Okay.
short term energy relieving behaviors. You know,
I'm going to
you're
write that down.
you
Stir.
STERBs. So you said it perfectly. They're short term. They don't work. They might work, temporarily and make us feel good, but they don't work, in the long run. And you're still going to get stuck, or you're going to even be more stuck because now you've added something, an addiction. But let me also clarify, though, Jessica, that
Mhm.
some of these STERBs can also be good things, like
Ooh, I like it.
working.
Oh,
We can
yeah.
use work, right? We can be workaholics. How about exercising?
Mhm.
We can just like, oh, I'm an exercise buff and this and that. And the key thing is that this is a question that we have to ask, because again, not everything is means that you're grieving. But this is a question, like, so for me, my go-to stirb typically is shopping, so I have to ask myself, again, just because I go shopping doesn't mean there's something going on that I'm not dealing
Right.
with. But this is what I have to ask, like, hey, why am I here? When I'm at the store, why am I here? Is there something? And it's just a red flag. It's just like, hey, question to, note to self, right? Like, okay, why am I doing this? A client was saying, well, is it wrong for me to have a glass of wine when I get home?
Mm-hmm.
I go, no, not necessarily. I go, but you do have to ask yourself, why am I having this sip? Am I trying just to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. And so that's the question. But everything can be a short-term energy relieving behavior. And so again, it's good, like you mentioned, to self-care and to take care of yourself. But there's that balance of, like, now are you not wanting to deal with something that you're just so focused on, doing something, even something good? Like, are you escaping? Are you trying? And again, there's a balance between escape, right? Because sometimes we just need to just get away and just count to 10 and just go to your happy place. But again, making sure that happy place is not your I'm not going to deal with this place.
Yeah. I talk about that a lot because I think that that distraction, it can be a healthy and a harmful coping skill. So we have to know where the limit is. How often am I using it? What's my frequency? What is my intent? All of those things are really important. Is distraction fine every once in a while? Absolutely. But if I'm doing it all the time, whenever things are tough, and so whenever I talk about coping skills, a lot of times I also try to, when we're looking at, well, but why am I doing this? I talk about, what are your triggers, traps, and tendencies? And you need to know your triggers, traps, and tendencies so that you understand, am I using this in a helpful way, or am I at this point using it in a harmful way? Because there are things that can be used for both good and evil in our life, right?
Yes. Oh my God. Totally. Absolutely. I mean, you got it. It's just that, again, we don't want to get, create this anxiety of, like, oh my gosh, am I, doing something bad? But it's just, note to self. It's like, I love that. I love that, that you just ask those questions, why, and knowing ourselves, right? Taking the time to know ourselves, and so I've learned, for me personally, with shopping, is that I know that's my go-to, so I'm more vigilant about it. But it's not like I'm like, oh my God, I leave the house and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But it is something that I'm just more aware, and I'm okay with it, Jessica, because I know that is my, right, that can be my trigger. So I know myself, and so then I'm like, okay, just note to self. And so just being aware, self-aware is really key here.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. So we're talking about lots of different loss and grief. Is there something specifically that you definitely feel like you need to let us in on, that was on your agenda that we haven't yet covered? Because I want to make sure we get all the goodies, because I've already got my stirb now, which I'm going to distribute to my people.
Yeah, I always say, are you disturbing? So there's three definitions that that I wanted to touch upon. So the first one was, right, is the normal and natural response to emotional response to grief, to the end or change of a familiar pattern or behavior. The second one is the mixed emotions, right, to the end or change of a familiar pattern or behavior. And the third one is that grief is like reaching out for someone who's always been there, and only to find out that when you need them one more time, they're no longer there. Or reaching out to someone that has never been there or rarely been there, but and when you need them one more time, let's say it's a an estranged parent that you somehow got reconnected, and you're about to start that communication again. And then they're gone again, whether they moved, whether they chose not to continue, or whether they passed away, and they're still not there. And so it's that feeling of reaching out. My dad, I always say this story because it's one of the most impactful things for me that I always remember, is that when my dad was still alive, Dad was not much of a talker. Mom and him were separated and lived in separate homes, and so it was just hard to get a hold of him. And I was always busy as well. But we agreed to a time and date that we would call each other and just speak. And so we were doing that. But in 2010, in the spring of 2010, we were just hit or miss. We couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't get a hold of each other for about a month and a half. And so Memorial Day comes, and it's a 3-day weekend. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see Daddy in Laredo, and I'm going to spend that whole weekend with him to make up for this month and a half that we hadn't reached out to each other. I was scheduled to leave at noon on Friday. And around 11, my sister, who was his caretaker, called me that she had found him, and he had died in his sleep, heart attack. And says, you can imagine, it was just extremely painful. But it was that, right? I couldn't, one more time, I'm trying to reach him, right? And I can't say, my last words. I love you. I'm so grateful you're my dad. And and that one more time. And even, for me, it had aspects of both. Dad, was just, he had he has some issues, and so he just stayed away. And so then this is someone that I'm still trying to reach out to, right? And I can't, and a lot of it, right, was my own doing. But when that happens with COVID, right, how many people did not get to say goodbye to their loved ones, right? Because they were in the hospital.
Yes.
They were isolated. They didn't get to say their I love yous, and to touch them, right? Touch is so important to us human beings, and get to touch them one more time, get to give them one more hug. And they didn't get to. And so that feeling of not being able to see your loved one one more time, you were like, gosh, I wish I could have said this more differently. And so that's the other definition of grief, that it is, we've all felt, right, reaching out to someone that is no one. And we talked earlier about losing a job, right? You're used to seeing your coworkers, right? Or you used to this thing that staff meeting you guys had together that was a fun time or something, and you're used to seeing people one more time, and they're no longer there because you don't no longer have that job, and that's the other thing about loss of job, is that you have that that fellowship, that camaraderie, and it's no longer there, so you're isolated now, even if you're working from home. And so it's really important to find ways to reconnect, to stay connected to people.
Yeah, and I do think there is, and I experienced it myself. It's just that we got kind of accustomed to staying at home again, and then what happened when things slowly started to open up was, maybe initially you kind of tried to dip your toe back into it, but then it was kind of like, I kind of just like to be at home, and I don't have to worry so much, and I can kind of, like, not do my hair. And I remember the first time I went to church, this is so embarrassing. I went to church group, and I had got up, and I was having some virtual meetings, and I had like curled the front of my hair and not the back. And then I was going to, for the first time, back to the ladies' meeting in the morning for Bible study. And I went, and this of my hair was curled and all of this is like undone. And I was just so embarrassed, but I just totally forgot about it because I had got up and got myself ready and I was like, oh, I'll get to that in a little bit, and never got back to it. And so it's just some funny things happened in that time. But then what we did was we kind of, especially there was a lot of people who continued to stay more isolated and stay to themselves and different things. We went to the movie theater to watch Maverick, of course, but that was our first movie since pre-COVID, like, you know, and so it was like this weird experience of like all these people around, and, you know, it's just different. We hadn't been to a movie in so long. So there's just some things that are coming back into our life that kind of sometimes feel weird. I even told my husband on the way to the movie theater, I was like, I don't know why, but I just feel really weird. Like I feel really a little bit nervous, and I'm not, that is not my personality, by, you know, but I kind of sensed it a little bit. And it wasn't necessarily about being around a lot of people. It was just that I hadn't really been to a movie in a long time. And, you know, it was kind of dark in there and there's a lot of people and just different. So
you're not the only one, Jessica. Actually, there's a study last year that you know, it's, you know, long COVID, that part of it is just anxiety has gone up more, I think 17%. And so yes, right, we're, you know, we love people, we love to be around people, but now we're, you know, there's some hesitancy, right? There's some, you know, some anxiety. And so that's just part of our life now, you know, where we're I mean, we just, you know, we're in Dallas, and I went into the elevator, and one of the staff that was working there, I think she was probably doing something with her notepad or something, that she didn't realize that I was there, because I always put myself in the corner just so other people can walk in. And so when she saw me, she kind of like hesitated, and then like she didn't kind of want to go in, but the door had already kind of closed. And then so she immediately put her mask on, you know, and, you know, and I felt kind of, I mean, I felt kind of like, why do I have, you know, something wrong with me? But it's that, right, that kind of that little fear, and maybe that's a protocol that she's asked to do. But again, is that hesitancy that we now have being around people, where before, right, we just loved it. We're, you know, had this free kind of attitude of like, hey, I love, the more, to me, the more the merrier.
yes.
But now it's like, yikes, you know.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I wanted to just mention, this, I have this little meme from the Institute that says, no matter how fast you run, you can't go around your broken heart. And so often, just, you know, we try to do that, right? We try to, and I hope you don't mind me using your example of your hair, is that, right? We will only kind of fix what's visible, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, the rest of our broken heart kind of like is there bleeding and all that, you know, but we'll present, right? Just what's presentable. And so, but we can try all different things. We can try everything, you name it. But but if our heart is broken, if our heart is grieving, you got to deal with it, or it's going to deal with you, you know.
So true.
And so we can't run around it. And so that's why we have, you know, individuals like yourself, you know, a counselor, you know, we have compliment, you know, we complement each other. We help people walk you through that journey, because if you don't address it, it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse.
It sure will. You're not wrong about that. It just, like you said, it just stacks up on you. And before you know it, you're in a bad situation. You're in a bad way. And, you know, I had, you know, my fair share of grief as well. And a lot of times we we were talking about this. I don't know if we said this at the beginning, though. It's just that, sometimes we compare our grief
Mhm.
situation. And that's something that we need to, as just humans being kind to ourselves, we need to let go of and just be able to say that this was my grief experience, and my grief experience doesn't lose value because of someone else's experience, or it doesn't, have more precedent than someone else's because it seemed to be worse or it was a difficult situation. We just need to be able to accept that we're grieving, maybe someone else is grieving, and that those two things are not interconnected.
They're not. They're not. We grieve. We each grieve at 100%. Even if it seems similar, it is not. It is not, and it's actually very hurtful to compare. One of the things. I mean, none of us, when we know somebody's hurting, I don't know anyone that wants to be hurtful and mean. Actually, in fact, I really believe people wanna condole, going to be have empathy and sympathy and compassion, and people just want to help the hurting person.
Mhm.
So I really truly believe that. But however, we try to do it in ways that are not helpful, and that is by we immediately say, right, I know how you feel, and it's like we don't, I was sharing with you earlier, even if we had a similar loss, let's say, my mom died, and if say you had yours too, that I don't know your relationship with your mom. I don't know, you don't know my relationship with my mom. And, maybe my relationship was not a good one, so for you to say, I know how you feel, and you had a great relationship with your mom, you don't, then the other thing about it is that when again when we I was with a couple of people that in a funeral, and they were saying, we're having conversation, they were talking about their family member having cancer, breast cancer, and trying to encourage them. They're like, hey, it can be worse, it could be this and that, and it's like, oh no, and so I listened, and I just said, hey, they're experiencing that loss at 100%. They're feeling that they'll have to lose a breast or both or whatever, and that's a big deal, and I know another friend last year posted, about also had cancer, losing her hair, and everybody always wants to be positive. Like, oh, but you're still so beautiful, and
Yeah.
you're this and that. But no, but it's just validating that pain right now. Right now, I miss my hair. I
Yeah.
don't have my hair anymore. I don't have my breast. I don't have, my arm, with diabetes. I lost my foot, just, it, yes, intellectually, could it be worse?
Yeah.
Probably, but it is worse, at that point, that person is hurting. So we don't compare and we don't minimize,
Yeah.
we are present with them at that very moment. Somebody loses a job. I'm so sorry. Not like, oh, you'll find something better. You deserve better. Somebody loses a relationship, right? Like, oh, there's other fish in the sea,
Mhm.
like, no, no, no. Like, gosh, I'm so sorry. In right, we want to say more, right? We want to try to
Yes.
less is more. Remember that. Less
Yeah.
is more. It's like, I'm so sorry. Just if they allow you, give them a hug, can I give you a hug, and hug them. But less is more when we're trying
Yes.
to help someone that is in pain
I
or
love
grieving.
that. I love that. I love that. I heard you saying things like, a lot of times we're trying to rationalize an emotional experience, and we need to back away from that when we see ourselves dipping our toes into that, or it starts to come out, kind of rein it back in, because the reality is at that point we're trying to be solution focused instead of emotionally focused.
Hmm.
And then I always just talk about being careful with the fact that we love positivity, like, as people who work in difficult situations, a lot of times positivity is, welcome and we like it and all of those things, but there is a point where it becomes toxic to people, and there is something called toxic positivity, and we need to be aware of that and be able to manage that as well, because not every situation is something that is we can, minimize away and wash away, and that it's not affecting someone. And so it's okay to lean into the feeling of, especially those uncomfortable feelings, those less desirable feelings. It's okay to lean into that. And we will be better friends, better supporters if we lean into those feelings instead of trying to divert or distract to what we consider more positive feelings.
Oh my gosh. And Jessica, I just with the Johnny Depp lawsuit that was showcased on TV, I don't think I knew about gaslighting,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been thinking a lot about that because in a way we can do that, right, to each other. We can invalidate, right,
Yes.
some of those, the truth for us. And it's like, oh, but don't, but yeah. And I'm like, and I have honestly had never, that I can remember, heard of the word
Mm-hmm.
gaslighting. But now I'm like, that's a big loss. I know that people that don't feel believe, that grief is even very painful when people don't allow you to feel what you feel,
Yes.
and they're invalidating your feelings. And so then it's also a note to self. It's like, do I do that? Do I
Mm-hmm.
invalidate somebody's reality by whatever I say? And so that's, to me, a new terminology for me to just really, I'm going to be digesting it a little bit more,
Yeah.
because unfortunately I believe that is something that we can do to each other when we are quick to move on to something positive.
Mhm. Yeah, we can do it to each other. And what's really interesting about gaslighting is we can do that to ourselves with our own thoughts. And so sometimes we may not be, a lot of times it is gaslighting is it lives in the same place as narcissism for a lot of people, or like personality issues. But realistically, with the me me type of society that we live in, we all, and this is hard to say, but we all kind of sometimes display some characteristics of those traits. It doesn't mean that we're all narcissistic or we all have personality issues. It just means that there are times where we can display those characteristics. And so we have to be really careful and manage it, because a lot of times if we've been gaslighted, it's really easy for us to gaslight someone else, because we do things in modeling. We watch, we've only had you only have so many experiences with grief that is like a first person experience, like it actually, and so those things that are modeled for you are what you end up going out and doing because it's something you've seen. And so you try to replicate it. That's kind of what life is kind of, we replicate some of these behaviors that we've seen in the past because that's how we've been taught to handle it, right? We're not actually taught how to handle grief, how to talk to people, where none of that is really taught. And so it can actually be modeled really inappropriately, and it can come off as gaslighting and different things. So I think that was a very astute observation.
No, and again, going back to what it results, right? When that happens, then what do? We isolate, because why? We don't trust anybody anymore, right? To
Mhm.
express our feelings. And isolation is probably one of the most hurtful choices that you can make when you're trying to overcome grief is not to isolate. And yet that's when we go, when we don't feel misunderstood, understood. And, one of the things that I've noticed about grief is that our capacity to be there for people is kind of short term. Like, people are there, like, that first week, man, you got the calls, you got the, this and that, and then shortly it just fizzles out. And yet we need that long-term support, right now, with suicides just being high. And so grieving alone is not the right choice. And unfortunately, sometimes we go that direction because we don't. I really believe we're not equipped to be present with people without trying to fix. And so that's why my goal is to just really continue to bring this message of what grief is, as far as is normality, so that we can be there for each other. And we don't have to be a therapist, or a counselor or a specialist to be there for somebody, And so I love, continuing to learn all the time. And one of the YouTube messages that I saw, this twin doctor, Dr. Guy Winch, psychologist, he says that chronic loneliness possesses the same risk for long-term health as cigarette smoking. It increases likelihood of early death by 14%.
Yeah. And right now, I think that people who reported feeling lonely since 2019 till now has risen by like 48% or something wild. So just that people do feel lonely. They do feel isolated. They do feel like, I think sometimes we've also gotten to a situation. I don't know if you're seeing it much in your work, but I'm definitely seeing it, is that there has been a lot of delayed grief. So this whole situation has happened and we kind of just moved through it and tried to keep treading water, and all of the hits were coming, whatever it was, if it was job loss, if it was, a family death to COVID, if it was, the whole family having COVID and it being in your house for 3 weeks straight or 4 weeks straight or whatever it was, working from home, all of these things, right? And now that we're back to whatever everyone's saying is normal, whatever that is, I still haven't figured it out. Yeah. People are like, I don't know why I'm so anxious and why I just cry at a moment's notice and all these things, but they haven't put it together that we just had a rocky 2 years and it's not over yet. We haven't, come to a place where things are back in a healthy position. We were talking about the fact that now people are, losing their retirements due to the loss of 401ks and stock market and inflation. And, so people are planning now that we're planning to be retired or working on retirement or in retirement or looking for jobs again and doing different things. So the lifestyle is changing. And so I just think that that's so important, but I'm seeing that delayed grief piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we have to, there's right in times of emergency, right? In times of need, right? You just got to take care of things, right? And you just got to you got to survive. And that's appropriate. I mean, to survive. Yeah. But I really think that we can do both when things are not going well. That one, we recognize, okay, so one of the things we do here in our family is we talk about, highs and lows at dinner time. And we're constantly, it's like if there's something happened today, right? Not yesterday, a year ago, but today, because every day there is something, like you said, I think we probably should accept the fact that there's not going to be a normal anymore. And we shouldn't, be here expecting it. We should just go with what we have right now and just talk. What is going on? What did affect me today? Is there something that was said, something I saw? And just, guys, be aware of what we watch on the, how often and how long we watch the news. It just
yes,
really depressing, and really scary, and so you got to stay informed, but at the same time, you got to guard our minds, because then And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm feeling too anxious, then I'm a little bit more irritable.
Oh, for sure.
And right. And then, so then I take it on my family and things, things like that. I'm not as patient. And so right now we can say, okay, this was a rough day, or this is rough time right now. Okay, I'm feeling this, and validate and give yourself permission to feel. But then, like, okay, what am I gonna do with this? And so a really important thing, Jessica, that I really hope people will understand is the myth, the misinformation that time heals all wounds is probably one of the worst things that's out there, because time alone will not heal all wounds.
No.
Time only passes, it does nothing. But time with action within a time, will help you process and move on. But if you're just hoping that if your heart is broken and just time will pass and you'll feel better, it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, a lot of that mentality came from when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the psychologist, was talked about the stages of a dying person. It got brought over to grief, that there's stages in grief, and then there's no stages in grief. That was for somebody that was dying. And even then she was like, it's not a cookie cut kind of formula. In fact, her son in, I think, 2020 was kind of like interviewed, and he said, I'm quoting here, he says, she wrote that her theory of stages was never meant to help tuck messy emotions into neat packages,
Yeah.
like a recipe or a ladder for conquering grief.
Yeah.
Grief is different for everyone, even if there are occasional some similarities. Everyone has to make their own way through it, and so there's no stages. Time will not heal all wounds. You got to take the right actions, and just again, like with you, Jessica, you're an LPC, you help people through that journey. I help people through that journey too, as a grief recovery specialist. And so you gotta take those actions, correct actions, to get healing.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is one thing that I've seen and seen again is professionals just wanting to use that grief cycle. And I'm like, for me, grief is like you take that cycle and then you take your pen and do all this inside of there, and it can go anywhere and it can land any place at any moment, at any day, and then maybe you've come up with some kind of semblance of what grief is like, but it's chaotic. There's no method. We don't move, like it said, in these neatly formed little, stages. And once you've felt your, anger, then you move here, that's not how that works, because, it's an unfortunate message. I agree with that 100%, because
and so but you can be aware that, like, in an anniversary, right? You prepare. It's like, okay, I know this is going to be hard. Christmas is, the holidays, things that have some connection to an experience of loss that you had, just being aware that, you're probably going to, I tell my family, when my mom's birthday is coming up, it's like, oh, or at that day, I'm like, I'm just feeling sad, I remember I miss my mommy, and so again, just you can prepare, but there's, again, don't confuse that with, stages of anything.
Yes.
Because there's no time frame.
Yeah. I love that you talk about prepare, because the only other person who's ever talked to me about preparing grief, which I was so blessed to have him as my supervisor, is a man who is LPC. His name is Ron, out of Midland. What's up, Ron? Wonderful, because whenever I was working with him, we were getting ready to move to San Antonio. We moved to San Antonio. I know people everywhere. I mean, you can tell I'm a talker. And so I don't know very many strangers. I knew 0 people in San Antonio. I was like, seriously? So he helped me to prepare for the grief that was coming by doing a lot of journaling and then tapping and preparing myself. I don't know if you're familiar with the EFT, the tapping, and we did a lot of tapping, a lot of everything, so that whenever it was time for the grief to come, it wasn't like this huge tidal wave, but instead it was more like, small waves that came in and out. And it helped me so much. And I talk to people about whenever you are in situations where you can prepare for your grief, taking action to do that is so important. And so I love that you talked about that, because that was not on my list, but yes.
I love that you were taught that, because all this is taught. Unfortunately, we weren't taught any of this. Like you mentioned it earlier, we're taught how to acquire things, right? An education, a job, and this and that, but we never taught like what happens when we lose something, and how to equip ourselves to really, walk through that. Yeah. And so I appreciate that you mentioned that, that the grief was still going to be there, but it's just wasn't going to be this big tidal wave, right? But the grief, we're still going to experience, because something changed, right? Something ended, something familiar to you ended and changed. And so you're coming to San Antonio, no one, the relationships are not there. There's just a lot of change. Moves are one of the most difficult types of losses that people don't recognize. Even moving from house to house, you have to, moves are really hard for me. And so we bought the home that I'm in right now a year ago. We turned a year ago. But we had to say goodbye to our old home.
Yes.
All memories, all things, because then again, you don't want to bring that grief. And so, Jessica, the thing I want to encourage people is that the opposite of grief is not no grief, or is not, recovery doesn't mean that you're not going to hurt. Recovery means that you're going to start feeling better to be able to participate, more fully in your relationships. But it doesn't always mean heal. It means that you might take little steps towards it. It's kind of like a spiral, right? That we might almost feel like, man, I'm going through this again. And actually you're not. You're actually at a different level, still seeing maybe that you're experiencing some of the same pain or something, but you're actually at a different level. And so I also want people to understand that recovery doesn't always mean, healed, but that you're moving forward, even baby steps, but you're still moving forward to a better place where you can be present. Because one of the things that grief does, it takes us out of the moment, right? Where we're stuck talking, remembering the past, what happened, didn't happen. And because of that, we're worried about, am I going to meet the right person? What's going to happen with this? So we're never present, because we're either in the past or we're in the future, but we're never present. And so recovery means that you start to get into a place where you can be present.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yes. And exactly what you said. We're just grief and the loss, it's not going to magically go away, and it's not going to go. And it's about decreasing the frequency, decreasing the intensities over time. But they're going to be there. You're going to feel the feelings, because a loss is a loss and it doesn't ever go away.
Yes. I have a really pretty nasty scar in my knee that happened when I was 7 years old. I didn't get stitches, so the scar is more visible. And I always show that to, my clients and my friends and anybody that I'm talking about grief, is that, you can see that scar, that like nobody's going to take it away. I mean, it's there with me till I die. But when I touch it, it doesn't hurt anymore.
Yeah.
As when it happened, when it happened, it was pretty ugly and painful. And so the scar is still there, and there's no denying it. I still remember how it happened, but it's no longer painful.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt me.
Yeah. I love that. I've just recently completed a new training, and it's for accelerated resolution therapy. And it is specifically for, traumas and grief, but you can do specific traumas or specific grief, or you can do like a day in the life to like alleviate symptoms that you have day to day. If you're overly anxious or you feel depressed
Mhm.
or any of those things, or like if there's something that's a ruling factor in your life. And it's like a 1 to 6 session thing depending on what you need, but one of its core kind of things that it stands on is that you keep the knowledge. You're always going to know this happened,
Mm.
but it can help you to lose the pain.
Mm.
So you keep the knowledge, you lose the pain associated with it, because we really look at sensations and feelings. So you look at the body sensations and the feelings, and you're using your brain through bilateral eye stimulation to help you to make a new image in your brain that is not replacing any kind of memory. It's just
Mm.
helping you to foster something different so that it doesn't hurt so bad.
Wow. I
It's
love that.
amazing. It's amazing. I was able to have a few sessions myself. So, I will never bring anything to my practice that I don't try myself. And I'm just a believer. We'll just say that. I'm a believer, very firm believer. And so
I
I
love
got to process, and what I processed was losses, grief and loss that were death and job loss. And
it.
so is very, very helpful. And then I
Love
also
to
did
hear
a day in a life, and it ended up being, thought it was starting as like daily anxiety, but then it ended up turning into just like the pressures that I was putting on myself. So
Mm.
that's what was creating the anxiety, but the real theme was the pressure that I was putting on myself. And
Wow.
so, yeah. And so it's very interesting to find once you get into it. So absolutely, I'm all in with you. So we're going to continue this journey together, helping people and, growing and learning and sharing information. But I just want to thank you so much for being here, because you
Oh,
just gave
yeah.
us so much. I'm definitely taking the stirp. I loved that. That just made my day. Um, so I'm definitely taking that. But
Thank
is there anything you want to leave us with today?
Yes, Jessica, if I can, again, thank you for having me, and it was such a rich conversation. So just two things. One is I always like to end with the that you can thrive, the can thrive, and can just means, you know, a simple reminder just to consider, right? Assess the feeling, of the behavior that you're feeling or the behavior that's happening. Avoid judging yourself.
Mhm.
What am I feeling? What is the trigger? Then the A is for act. Then take the correct actions, right? You want to start turning away from SERBs, right? Because
Yeah.
we talked that there's stuff that we're doing, right, to avoid. So now we're gonna start turning away from SERBs. And sometimes it just starts with just taking a big breath, just breathing like, okay, what am I feeling? And then the N is for nurture, right? It's just
Mhm.
to remember that healing is a spiral process. Repeat the healthy steps to continue the maintenance process. You'll learn to rebound quicker with less pain, and be kind to yourself and others, right? Nurturing yourself, but also I love what you said, and you're right. The same with me, Jessica. I will not, share with my clients or anybody what I'm not, trying myself, and so being kind to yourself first, and then to others, because we all grieve. And then just that, I love if people are interested in, there's a free ebook that I'd love to share with people, and they can just email me at Higinia Higinia .IOIH at
Okay.
gmail.com, and I'll send you that free ebook. It's called Myths About Grief, and we didn't get into any of those, but there's
Mhm.
six myths about grief that keep us stuck. So I'd love to share that if you
That'd be great.
email me.
That would be wonderful. And I put your Facebook page up here so people go and join and get some good content. I'm not exactly sure. I just joined today, so I'm really excited. I didn't know there was a Facebook page, but I think there's a website coming soon as well. So is that correct? So that'll be something to be on the lookout for as well. I'm sure that it will be posted through the Facebook page, so maybe you can get some information there. So follow her on Facebook. And then here is my Facebook page. Remember to come and see me at Courageous Counseling and Consulting. We are on Courageous Communication on YouTube, so go and like us there. But everything is streamed through Facebook. We are so glad you're here. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comments section and we will get them answered for you through Facebook or through an email, and just let us know what you have. But we're so glad that you joined us today, and we are out of here. 1 hour, 15 minutes. We did it. Bye-bye.